Hi guys, welcome back to another podcast. We've got a special guest here, Millie, all the way down from Sydney. So Millie lives in Sydney. She's a political commentator. Really cool content on your Instagram as well, which I'll plug on the screen. So I'll put both your social media handles up in a second. But look, before we get into the topic of toxic masculinity again, because I did want to touch on this topic in a deeper sense, but then also from a female perspective as well, which I think would be really cool. You want to share some background, who you are?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Millie. I am a political commentator. I live in Sydney, originally hailing from Melbourne. I've been in politics in terms of paying close attention for probably around 10 years now. I entered the political conversation during the gay marriage debate and had some things to say there as a daughter of a lesbian couple and donor conceived as well. So yeah, I just pay attention to what our leaders are doing and chime in here and there. And yeah, I love to comment on social issues and sort of cultural trends. And so that's why I wanted to come on the podcast, I suppose.
Awesome. I'm so keen because I think that you're definitely going to, add a really important perspective to this. So look, I mean, we'll get into it. So I don't think we necessarily need to give a massive explanation of what toxic masculinity is because we've kind of touched on it already. But, just from a basic level, we're obviously talking about norms, that society have dictated that are harmful, or whoever's dictated that these norms are harmful to society as a whole. So, such as suppressing your emotions, being aggressive, being tough, even being stoic. We spoke in our first podcast. That's considered as toxic masculinity, which is mind-blowing to me. But and so these are obviously behaviors that can lead to, a setting that's not wanted in society, right? From a female perspective, from a male perspective. I guess for you, do you agree with the current definition of what toxic masculinity is?
I mean, I find that based on who you talk to, the definition's going to differ based on personal experience. And so I think a good place to start here is, what do you think toxic masculinity is?
What do I think it is? So it's funny because obviously I think what it was back in the day, and we will touch on, the historical context and where it was and what it's become. So I think for me, toxic masculinity is lack of ownership, lack of personal responsibility, not being strong, but not being able to control the ability to be strong, your strength. Obviously, violence, whether it's verbal or physical. So I think that's all stuff that used to be, it still is, but back in the day, we looked at that and we said, okay, that's pretty toxic. Like for a man to bash his wife, bash his kids, verbally abuse his wife and, have her doing all this stuff without it being, without compromise, we all said, that's toxic. I think where it is now, the definition now, where if you're a strong male and you're so laser focused on, being the best version of yourself, trying to create, trying to provide and create for your family, leading your family, because that's really important for a male to lead his family. Being stoic, not suppressing your emotions, but being aware of your emotions and not being, so emotional all the time. I think all that's what society believes toxic masculinity is today, and that's what I reject. Do you kind of agree with that, or you don't really agree with that?
I'll tell you what the main problem is. This entire generation is completely confused because this is a multilateral subject. We've got sort of the biblical definition of what is required of a man. We've got, the biological instinct that a man is inherently born with. And then we've got all these cultural attitudes that are constantly shifting and changing, which is just creating a whole web of where are we, what are we doing here? So for me, the way that I look at toxic masculinity, it stems from a desire to dominate a situation for lack of understanding inherent value. whatever that may look like to an individual. So with men struggling to find where they fit, from a place of insecurity, there's an instinctive need to try and control the situation, which is what leads to all these dominating behaviours. You know, men taking things out on their wives, being volatile even in the workplace, in their social groups, getting into fights. All of these things, I think, stem from a lack of security within where they fit in the world and what value they provide. I don't know. There's just so many things. I think, you know, men, if I'm honest, at a biological level, tend to be quite parasitic in nature. Like, even when we look at it in terms of what is feminine and what is masculine, the masculine, they're pursuers, they're takers. Women, traditionally speaking, we're receivers and creators. That's what we are. So our inherent value is that we can make another you, and we're born with that ability. And then all the other traits that we pick up along the way, such as our ability to nurture, care for a home, care for children, all of these things continue to enhance our value, but we inherently have it based on our ability to create, whether that even be in terms of, you know, in this day and age, our professional lives. Women are quite creative, and we fit into the workplace and add a whole different layer of value to the workplace on that front. So for men, I think it's gotten lost now that we've got women toe to toe in society with men, in particular in the workplace, and Miss Independent stepping up to compensate for what may be lacking. Men are a bit stuck on what their value is and what even is positive masculinity. And so that's what I sort of see happening in terms of the confusion. And of course, a lot of different social media trends exploiting those weaknesses within society.
Yeah, that's actually so true. And I guess the follow-up question after that is, well, who's to blame for that? Because you're absolutely right. I mean, we got to a point where, because of, you know, what, like back in the 60s, right? A lot of stuff that was toxic. But then you're right, I think over time, when the feminist movement came across and started saying, no, we're going to provide for ourselves, we're going to do this, blah, 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 blah. I think men, instead of them finding a way to work together, which you're right, that was exploited by certain groups that want to push certain agendas. So instead of that working together where we can have equality without taking away from the male energy, but then also, you know, elevating the female energy, we found, I think you're absolutely right, that the feminist movement created a lot of insecurity among men. And I think where we are right now is years of a result of that.
Yeah.
You know, like years of that insecurity building, and then, you know, how people are raising their sons now. Because you're absolutely right. I think that, you know, when you asked me initially, well, what's toxic masculinity? I think insecurity is a big one. I think a lot of issues stem from insecurity in men, and, you know, feeling like they have to compete with women, you know, in the last, 10, 15, 20 years. But I mean, who is to blame for that shift? Would you say it's the feminist movement? Would you say it's mothers? Would you say it's the media, like a certain agenda where they want to weaken men?
I think when we really get down to the bottom of it, it's scarcity and instability in the world. Even if you look at the effect wars had on families and putting people into what I would just describe as a broad spectrum state of dysregulation in their nervous system, right? So women being stressed about not having enough resources is going to impact the quality of their relationships with the men. Men being stressed about being able to provide security and containment within their family structures is going to throw everything out of whack. I think that women being put in a position where it is a necessity to work and provide is a very scary thing in and of itself. I can even speak to myself as a single woman, you know. It is daunting knowing that I have to provide for me and there's only me to fall back on. where once upon a time we'd maybe pair off, or you could stay single and sustain yourself quite well. So, it's dysregulating, and I find that women, we are capable of integrating masculine traits. And so it's the necessity of having to integrate masculine traits to assimilate into that world in which we do need to provide for ourselves that's throwing things out of whack, because it's taken some of the value away from men in the sense that Miss Independent may not necessarily need a man. She may want one, but the requirements have shifted as well. And then men also being lost and, again, quite parasitic in nature in terms of the way that men pretty much, everything that comes out of them in terms of action is in pursuit of breeding, really, like on a biological level. And then some of that is translated, like that instinct, into the business world in which they're fiercely chasing something. So there's that chaser instinct and the need to possess as many resources or possibilities as they can. So, these two things mixing together, men being stuck because women aren't necessarily open to receiving sex from a man that is not able to provide her with anything, it's a little difficult. And it's not even just providing in the sense of like financial security. When I think about positive masculine traits, I think about, being able to protect a female. Being attentive, I think, is a really big one. Men, when they're fully in their masculine, are able to articulate things that need to be done independently, and they provide a level of security of which women don't even need to consciously think. I mean, there's a whole movement online, women on TikTok in particular, filming themselves with their head in the clouds, and their men.
And the man is like looking at what's happening, like who's going to attack, like what is he going to get done? Yeah, I've seen that. And it's true though. It's true. Yeah. And I feel like, and I mentioned this in the first podcast we did around this topic, where a lot of females actually want to fall back to their feminine energy. They want to be in that essence. And it's got nothing to do with their ability to possess masculine traits, as you said. They can still be very strong and independent and climb the corporate ladder and all of that. But when they find a man who's above them, because women don't date down. They don't, right? As a man, I might, date a Macca's worker or whatever. I don't care about her status. I don't care about, how much money she's making. I don't care about how much money she's making at all. Like, she could literally be making like $15 an hour at Macca's or whatever it is, and it would not persuade me to either date her or not date her. Whereas women tend to date up. And I think that the problem that we're having, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is because so many men are not playing that part, a lot of women feel the need to compensate and then play that part themselves. And they don't feel secure. You're right. Feeling secure among a man, I think that's a positive part of masculinity. Yeah. The fact that you can trust him, but if he's not playing that part, you're not going to trust him with your life. You're not going to trust that he's going to take care of you, that he's going to protect you, provide for you. Yeah. You know what I mean? So, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, even to get personal for me, I don't date up a lot of the time. Yeah, and it's kind of a mistake in hindsight, but I'll get to that. No, because the traits that I'm looking for in a man, I don't usually find them in the upper echelons of the business world, the corporate world, all of that. I don't find them in those competitive, fiscally successful fields, I'm looking for, like I said, that sense of containment, that masculinity. It may be somebody with a very humble job role, but it doesn't really matter what a man earns. It's more the character he brings to the table. I could be with a man that earns less than me, but his masculinity would still make me sort of default to that feminine energy, like you said, and bring out good things in me as a woman. And so that's sort of more what I look for. I think, having been on my own intermittently for quite a while, It's sort of, I look for who's going to add value, but I have encountered men that may add value that they don't necessarily have confidence in, and then that insecurity has then ultimately led to the end of that connection. So that's another thing. And men are extremely insecure with the value I find that they can add to my life, which is really sad, but it leaves you a little bit stuck. And then you look at all these movements with women in particular. I don't know if you're familiar with Shira 7.
No, I'm not.
So this is a woman that claims herself to be a financial advisor,
Okay.
but she gives out dating and relationship advice, basically telling women to secure financial assets for themselves in dating so that they're never at a loss. So this is a woman that's very of the opinion that all men cheat and that love is grown, not something that is necessarily instant. And just getting women to a point where they raise their standards, so to speak, which is fine. It's just that when you promote a financial focus in relationships, the type of men you're going to attract are not going to possess the qualities you may instinctively want. And you may end up with the more controlling and abusive types because it really is a transactional relationship rather than one built on any wholesome compatibility or qualities.
Yeah.
And I think it comes from a point of hopelessness where a lot of women have given up. And so there's a real window there that she's exploited in women. You know, those women that are very defeatist about it. Oh, there's no good men out there, this and that. They're going to be the ones that are going to cling to that sort of comfort that comes from, okay, you can get what you want out of a man. You can emotionally manipulate the situation so that you're at an advantage and not any worse for wear dating men.
It's actually, I agree with you, believe it or not, because when I say date up, I'm actually not just thinking about financial. I think what is the most important thing that women need, and I'm not saying this as facts, just from my perspective, women can financially provide for themselves. We get that. We're in a society where there's a lot of opportunity for women to go get a job, climb the corporate ladder, get an education, etc. We're not really in a society that is we're not in caveman times where, you know, a woman really needs protection. Like, you know, now I say this, you know, with a disclaimer because obviously there's a lot that we can improve as a society in terms of safety around women, you know, walking around by themselves and etc. But generally, you know, if I'm out with my girl, we're not really, 90% of the time, we're not in a situation where I need to fight for her. I need to, you know, fists up, right? 90% of the time, okay? And so that's not really a concern. Emotional stability. So when I say date up, I actually mean, like, yeah, you want to be financially stable because, you know, I want to be able to provide for my entire family and give my future wife the choice on whether she wants to work or raise children or whatever. But I'm talking about dating up in terms of your emotional intelligence as a man, you know, and I think that when we talk about, you know, your really top income earners, you know, your CEOs, yeah, a lot of them might not have that emotional intelligence, you know, and that's where the toxicity comes in, right?
Yeah.
Like they're that, you know, they're really assertive and they don't want to hear anyone's opinions. That's a lack of emotional maturity.
Yeah.
So I think you need, you know, it's not just about financials. It's about that emotional stability that you're going to provide, you know, that calmness, the safety. So I think when I talk about, you know, how women, you know, pick their partners, how they want to date, would you say that's like probably one of the key things, or no, not really?
I mean, you touched on men in the positions of power, and I kind of want to focus on that for a second.
Yeah, sure.
We live in a society that has such an uprising of your cluster B personalities. So narcissism, sociopathy, all sorts of dissociative behaviours. Men in those positions I find to be substance abusers at a large percentage. So whether that be politicians, CEOs, lawyers, all of them, like there's a level of dysregulation that's often supplemented with substance abuse or other vices, even sex addiction, these sorts of things. It's like these men are driven to the top, but they don't have that emotional stability like you were talking about to actually proceed with a healthy lifestyle as they do it. It almost comes from a point of dysregulation a lot of the time. And so I find that, you know, women are a bit lost as well. They'll come across these men, and men are taught how to lie and present themselves as being somebody entirely different, which is why, you know, the first 6 months of getting to know a man is going to tell you who he is, because all of these dating coaches and all this advice is basically telling people, pretend to be this, pretend to be consistent, pretend to be this and this and this. It's not showing them how to actually be stable and consistent. And so you end up, you know, experiencing men with a lot of these hidden vices or hidden emotional problems, often violence, you know, it gets suppressed, a lack of sense of control that then comes out in other behaviours. And so it can be really quite dangerous as well as a woman, not being able to navigate those types of men, because you can find yourself stuck very quickly. The other thing is men oftentimes want to be stable. They want to be able to be the dependable person in your life. They make plans with you in a partnership, but then they can't, within themselves, due to their own burdens, actually maintain that energy and that behaviour. And so a lot of men will come in and completely disrupt the lives of women that have their own independence and stability. That's been my experience. Like a bull in a china shop, a man has been able to come into my life and just mess with my money, my stability, my everything. Me under the perception that he's actually able to provide that stability, it's been completely wrong, and then I have to pick up the pieces.
Right, yeah.
So like there's a whole lot of inconsistent behaviour, I suppose, or just, you know, good faith desire to provide something that they don't have the foundation to maintain.
That's actually very true. There's this quote, you can't be consistent with who you're inconsistently not, or something like that. Look, I don't know it exactly, but that's basically what you just touched on, and that's so true. You can fake it for so long. You can go out and you can be charming and you can be respectful for a good 2-3 months, but if you actually haven't done the work to really work and refine on those characteristics and those traits of patience and actually, you know, being polite to the waitress and all this stuff, you know, and being respectful, you can do it for a good 3-4 months, and then your true colors are going to come out.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's kind of like that whole, you know, when you date and it's perfect, and then you move in together and it just goes to hell.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the guy or the girl, whatever, you know, you can't fake it for that long. You know, your true colors are eventually going to come out, and I think you're absolutely right. And maybe this is an issue more with men than women, but I think, we're being sold on, and even the whole Andrew Tate stuff, right? You're being sold on, you know, be disciplined, be this, be that. And it's, you have a whole group of men who are like, I want to do that. I want to do that. And they can do it for a good, temporarily they can do it.
Yeah.
But then are they actually being taught the longevity of it? Probably not, right?
No,
they're not actually being taught the longevity of it, right? So I think that's, it's interesting that you touched on that.
There's so much gold in what Tate says, but it's like you were just saying, and I think that really is the kicker here. I don't think men know how to create a foundation within themselves. There's a lot of noise on the internet, even with the Stoicism movement. Be this, be that. Okay, but are you doing the inner work? Are you processing your trauma? Are you asking yourself, what is going to make me a more stable and fulfilled man within myself that I can then add on to a woman? Or am I just trying to pack a wound over and over again and repeat the same pattern in every relationship that I'm in? And then with women as well, I think sometimes we get stuck on boundaries, one of which being that we're so exhausted with having to put them up in the workplace and every other area of our lives. You know, I just find for me, and I always regret it when I do it, but if ever I make concessions in a relationship or make my boundaries flexible, I immediately see why I should not have done that, because men have a tendency to take and push boundaries and they are constantly testing our boundaries as well. So, you know, it's a bit of a two-way street there. I find that there is actually a lot of value in what a lot of these female dating coaches put forward, in the sense that they are showing women very clear boundaries. Because I think a lot of us have been violated by men in so many ways. You know, they push our emotional boundaries, often our physical boundaries, you know. And so I don't think there's a woman that I've spoken to that hasn't had a man at least attempt to violate her in some way. And usually in a sexual context.
Just, can I add on to that?
Yeah.
Because we talked about this in the episode of addiction, so pornography and porn addiction. I don't want to go too far off track, but, you know, I touched on, you know, the push of pornography among young men is one of the reasons women, that there's this crazy expectation of women in the bedroom. You know, and maybe that's where that, you see the link there where, you know, yeah, like you talked about sexual violation, where men just don't really have the right perception, and they're trying different things, or, you know, if she says no, they still, because of what they've seen, you know. Do you think that's like something that's, or do you really think it is genuinely
I think, I mean, I can only draw off personal experience here, but I will note that everyone's experience is different. I find that men oftentimes will feign a certain level of respect for you, and then one of the ways that the true perception bleeds through the cracks is how quick they are to violate, or at least attempt to violate, our boundaries. And so, sexually speaking, I honestly am of the opinion that men come into sexual interactions and treat it as a form of basically masturbation. I don't think there's a whole lot of emphasis on connection. I don't think that intimacy, at least emotionally, is at the forefront for a lot of these men. Men in particular, they do tend to set the scene sexually as well, the tone. And so you find women in these sexual relationships that lack substance. And in regards to porn, like you were saying, men are being manipulated in terms of their dopamine receptors,
Right, yeah.
what they find to be pleasurable,
Yeah.
what they find to be exciting. And they're used to very quick gratification when it comes to that. So, you know, someone's individual need fulfillment, I think that there's a whole sacred aspect to sex that's being glazed over in society.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's honestly very upsetting the way society is.
Can I challenge you on this? Because
Go for it.
it's probably not a challenge, but I want to know your thoughts on this. Now, I've always said that women aren't to blame, but if women had a higher standard, right? So, and I'm not, this got nothing to do with religion, but no sex before marriage, or no sex until it's really serious. No this OnlyFans crap, no Tinder. Like, if women had a really high expectation standard of men, you are not going to, we're not going to get intimate until you can actually prove to me that you're worthy of being intimate with me.
Yeah.
Right? And they actually held that standard, and there wasn't all this online swipe and go one night stand crap.
Yeah.
I personally believe that we would actually rise to that standard.
Yeah.
I personally think that we would. I think over time that we would actually rise to that standard and be like, yeah, I'm not going to get it that easy. Maybe I will have to, you know, show that vulnerable side of me and actually attempt to try build a connection with her. You know, and do you get what I'm saying? So
I do.
Do you feel like, I'm not saying it's women's fault, but do you feel like if that standard was a bit higher, where sex was not as easy to get, that would change things?
Broadly in a cultural sense, yes. But then I think if we're going to be really honest about this, like for me, I'm the person that withholds sex for upwards of 6 months. You know, oftentimes I'll just lean celibate. I may even date people that I don't even consider being intimate with sexually, right? If a man is not entirely genuine in his movements, the second that that is received, the behaviour changes. And so, you know, this is why I lean celibate anyway, because to be quite honest with you, there's never a person I've regretted not having sex with. I think sometimes the sexual factor is kind of irrelevant because men will pursue until they get that end point, and then that's all it is. It's sort of a prolonged game.
Yeah.
Right? And everyone's capable of pretending, and the harder it is to get, it doesn't necessarily mean that that man is going to bond to you in a way that's going to secure his consistency in your life. And there's a lot of talk about the ways in which men chemically bond, which I find to be really valid. So there's a lot of talk about the vasopressin bonding, which is the hormone that causes men to fall in love, so to speak. But the studies surrounding men in the military found it present with their teammates in the trenches. So it's basically the concept that men, when denied sex for X amount of time, usually 2 to 3 months, will start to basically give off stress hormones in response to not receiving that satisfaction, which then causes a survival instinct, the vasopressin, to start to bond him to that female. And it's very interesting the way it all works, but I find that oftentimes it doesn't really matter. All the signs may be there, but it's a lot of these other foundational aspects of a man's character that's going to keep him there and present.
That's really interesting. And it kind of, I mean, like I said, I don't want to get too religious, but it's interesting how, I mean, I was raised in an Orthodox household, so there's no sex before marriage. And so it's interesting, and the divorce rate is very low. Now, you could say that it's low because it's a lot harder to get a divorce in the Orthodox Church. Like, you can still get a divorce, like if there's violence or, you know, your husband cheats and the church will allow a divorce, but it's a lot harder than your general what's happening right now.
Yeah.
The divorce rate is just crazy right now. But, you know, I'd like to think that, you know, the reason why these marriages stay together is because, number one, I mean, there's no messing around before marriage. Like, it's rare that you have a man who's kind of slept with 100 girls or whatever before he marries this lady. And then number two, which what you just touched on, which I didn't even know that was a thing, where the longer, you know, for the period that they're engaged, you know, they're not having sex. And so maybe that is where the connection, you know, becomes it is deepened and... Because I didn't know that. So is that what you're saying? Like, where the longer you wait, the connection... Yeah. And it becomes a bit deeper.
It's so interesting because it's from a point of stress for the male. Like, being denied sex, even if it doesn't seem like they're being outwardly rejected, right? But being made to wait, it causes such a stress response biochemically in a man. And I think all the vasopressin related content really sort of, like, it educates people about how it will increase their propensity towards mate guarding, jealousy, possessiveness, which really provides that containment, I suppose, in a woman, like knowing that his eyes are only really on her. But you also find as well that men with a more traumatic background, they have more vasopressin receptors than the average man, so they're more likely to bond. And so it gets me wondering sometimes, you know, what if the baseline average male that has a healthy upbringing really struggles with all these interferences, such as pornography and whatever else, desensitizing him from a very young age? I'm not sure that the average man has the ability to form a healthy biochemical attachment anymore. And that's something I would love to see really looked into in terms of that hormonal level, I suppose. Because when I look at it, I'm like, they say it's not all men, but there's sort of a real trick to it in regards to attachment from man to man, and what deviates tends to be their personal experiences and trauma, but also their values and their character. And so I'm more inclined to assess men on their values and character and test them on their values and character more than I would place concern on the chemical bonding.
Yep. Well, actually, to add on to that, it's really interesting you said that, back to the orthodoxy, you're right, it's not just about that. They are raised in a way, like if you go to the times that I've been to a youth group, or every guy that I've interacted with, or not every guy, Jesus, majority of guys that I've interacted with in the Orthodox Church are very respectful, and they have values, and they have principle, and it's not fake. It's like, no, genuine. Like when they are there, we have our Easter coming up. We spend the entire week in church. It's called Passion Week. It's actually very beautiful. And the entire week we're at church basically reenacting the week before they crucified Jesus. And you've got the guys who stand there like crazy hours, who stand there in the altar. And, you know, I'm not saying that just because they stand there in the altar that they have got good traits and characteristics and stuff, but they are really, really good men. And they, you know, were raised to, you know, be respectful and have those really, you know, high quality characteristics. Like one of my good friends, you know, just such a good guy. You know, and the conversations I can have with him, and he's just so respectful, and I would trust him with my life, you know. So you're right. I think it definitely comes down to values and, you know, your character. Now, I'm not saying every single person in the Orthodox Church is going to have that. Definitely not. Like, I'm just saying from my experience of how majority of them were raised, they do have those values.
Yeah.
You know?
And to really add to that,
yeah.
Now, I may not have had a lot of sexual partners, but I've dated a lot of people. So I've got a very big understanding, in particular, watching a lot of other people's relationships and how they've unfolded. I'm at a point in my life where I am done with progressive men. It doesn't matter how many exceptions they may appear to have to the rule. A man that does not have a personal relationship with God, to me, is a complete and total write-off as a man. He's not going to be able to remain dutiful, in my mind. There's too many perversions that can lead to confusion in terms of the stimulus of life and circumstance, and basically the order of which his values are going to be placed is not something that's desirable to me at all. I like dutiful men that understand that things may not always feel good in a relationship, but it's something that can be created and maintained and even worked for. And I think that a lot of men are entering relationships based on convenience, status, and ultimately pleasure, which is not a fruitful union.
Yeah.
You know, personally, I look for somebody that puts God first, that I can sort of say, okay, this is a man with purpose that has a love for something ultimately other than himself.
Yeah.
Because that's me. You know, I'm by no means a perfect Christian, and I'm very quiet in my Christianity. It's not something that I put out there in people's faces, but, you know, for me, it's God first. If God says no, it's just not happening.
Yeah.
And that applies to a lot of my relationships.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's been a very disappointing experience, I suppose. Even if a man may allude to believing in God, it doesn't mean that he's going to, you know, have any sense of morality that maybe comes with that.
Yeah.
And not even necessarily in a biblical sense, because I don't think that you need to have a Bible education to be capable of love. But when you hold yourself to a higher standard and you can demonstrate a love for a system of which you hold yourself to a higher standard, it inherently makes you higher value.
Yeah.
I'm yet to see that demonstrated in a man that does not have some form of relationship with God in terms of the consistency of it. And there's almost a romanticism of that way of life, I suppose, that comes with a man of God versus a man that does not have a relationship with God.
It's really interesting, and I do want to add another layer onto that, and then we'll kind of move on. Now, I was reflecting on this a few months ago, cheating. And it's not just cheating to every toxic thing, but why a lot of, like, that cheat? I reckon there's a lot of cheating that happens within marriages. And I was actually at a wedding, and it really hit me how important the sacred of marriage is, right? And I mean, it's not for everyone, but I was at this wedding, and, you know, when the male and female get together and they get married, they are getting married before the Orthodox Church makes it clear that they're becoming one in Christ. It's not just them in the relationship. It is Christ. Christ is with them in the relationship. And I really thought about that. I'm like, well, if I'm married and Christ is in the relationship, it's like there's not just me and her. Christ is there. I'm not cheating on my wife. I'm not cheating on my wife. I'm not ruining the marriage. It's not just a female. I am betraying God. Like, you're right. God first. And when you have that value, a lot of this stuff that's happening, violence, sexual immorality, cheating, all that stuff, actually most of the time becomes void. Not all the time, because there's always going to be, like, humans are, by default, we're flawed. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be perfect, but you're right. When you do have that focus and God is that focus, or you have a greater sense of belief that's not just yourself. Because a lot of atheists, a lot of non-believers, like, they believe they're God. And that's not really good, because, we're, like I said before, we're naturally flawed.
Yes.
And if you're your God, well, it's not going to end well. Whereas if you are, worshipping and you are, what's the word? You're accountable to something greater. Not just accountable to my wife, I'm accountable to God. God can see everything. I'm not going to mistreat her. I'm not going to cheat on her. I'm not going to hit her. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that's actually, you're absolutely right. It's so important that your number one value is your belief system. Because then everything else falls into place.
That's exactly right. And it's what I would describe it as, and I'm not saying it's not possible for people who aren't religious, right?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I'm sure, maybe.
Yeah,
I haven't personally encountered it.
Fair, yeah.
But it's submitting to something outside of yourself that governs your behaviour. So, it's like you said, having that love, that submission to say, I love this system and this creator. I love more than my desires, and I understand that my behavior in line with this system is what I aspire to maintain. So through that strength in that relationship that you have with God, you're then able to put aside a lot of these things that ultimately don't matter. You can't show me a man who is fulfilled and happy and not broken in some degree that is a cheater. You know what I mean? Like, they're all fractured in some way. Even with women, women are traumatized. There's a lot of women who will cheat when they sense instability, because they're constantly seeking male validation. With men, I have not seen anything fruitful in terms of a person's character when I know that they're a cheater. Like, you look at these people and you examine their lives, they're not loyal, they're exploitative. There are a lot of different aspects about these people that are not desirable. And there was a guy I saw as well that was talking about it, and he's like, I don't do business with a man that cheats on his wife, because what's he going to do to me? And, it's at the core of your character. Who are you if you, do that to the person closest to you?
No, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I want to talk about society and whether you think that society can function well without strong men. But then I also want to touch on what are some positive, like, what do you consider positive traits of masculinity? So positive masculinity versus toxic masculinity. Like, what can we just leave in the 90s, leave in the 80s, and what should we be promoting more of? And the reason I tie this into can society function without strong men is because I actually think strength is a positive attribute of masculinity. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it depends what you look as strength. Like, are we talking physical, or are we talking mindset, or both?
I'm talking both. But the only reason I say both is because if you have a strong mind, you probably, most of the time as a man, you probably are physically strong as well. Now, I guess let me just add one more thing, because for me, like, I'm a midget. And so if I'm out there in public and someone wants to fight me, I'm not physically strong.
Hey, they're all the same height when they're letting you down.
Okay, wait, that's a good one. Wait, that's a good one. Fair enough. I
I
remember
saw
that.
it, I'm like, oh.
That's a good one, yeah. But like, do you get what I mean? So I personally, I gym for my mental health. I gym because I want to, I want to get big. But in terms of my physical strength, you put me in the ring with someone who's 6 foot and he's going to bash me. So I think I'd put more weight on the mindset rather than the physical strength. And what I mean by that is a man who's not going to fold on his values.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about, does society need men like that? A man who's going to lead his household in the right way. A man where they're pushing all this bullcrap around us in so many different ways. There's so many different agendas that are being pushed on us. A man who's not going to fold and lead his partner and his children down that path of destruction.
Yeah, so this is not an original concept, but a man who's able to deny himself short-term pleasure for long-term gain is a valuable man. Okay. And if he's able to demonstrate that in different areas of his life, like if I look at a man who really takes care of his physical health and will reliably go to the gym X amount of times per week and deny social occasions to do so, or leave early to social occasions to say, no, I have to do this tomorrow, I have these responsibilities, that's an element of consistency I would attribute to a high value man. Yep. Because he has the self-respect to actually say no, whether it be to me or whoever else, yep, in the face of pressures, because actually he values the value that comes from his duties. So when we look at positive masculinity, a man who takes care of himself is good. I personally do prefer that, even though I've been a security guard for 12 years or so intermittently and can hold my own. It is definitely nice to know I have somebody that at least has a similar level of strength to what I do. It's just that capability factor. Can this man defend me? But also, to add to that, can a man de-escalate conflict? Is he going to be a liability in a situation where there is conflict? Because oftentimes, your verbal skill set is what's going to prevent you from ending up a victim of certain violence. And being able to advocate as well for what is right in any given situation. So a man who has a good system, like we were talking about the system in relation to religion, that system extends all the way down through your behaviour in terms of how you will respond to conflict in a fight, how you will advocate for others, even when under pressure, because it becomes a muscle memory. You don't need to question what is the right decision. Oftentimes, you have a sense of what is right and wrong that is superior to a man that does not have a system in place that governs his way of being. So I think men that have a very good understanding of right and wrong and ability to assess where the line is in any given situation and to be able to maintain that line, in society, in relationships, whatever else, that code of conduct I think is incredibly important. I think men who are attentive, like I was saying before, bring so much value. Like a man who pays attention to what he can add to a room is a very valuable man, yep, in my eyes, because he's not looking to take from a situation. He's thinking, how do I fit in here and how can I best add to this equation? Yep. And when you're looking for a partner, that's a really good quality to have. My woman may have it all. What can I add to her life? How can I be valuable to her in her life? What needs can I meet? And you find that men find their sense of value through these acts of service. They're not always financial, but these acts of service and the appreciation they receive from those acts of service, yep, affirms their sense of value and place in society or in relationships. Yep. And so that's where it becomes a two-way street, I suppose, because women need to learn, I suppose, or relearn to be gracious in the face of these services and these considerations. Because I look at it and I go, well, what is love? Love as an action is consideration in my mind. Yep. If we're going to look at it in terms of action, it doesn't matter what it is in terms of context. If that person is able to be considerate, they are loving their environment to some degree. So I think men that are naturally considerate would be the ones that I'm drawn to. And making an exception on men that do not naturally have that trait has never worked out for me.
Okay.
Ever.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I totally agree with you, by the way. Men love appreciation. Big. Like, it's actually like one of the biggest things on my list for girls I want to attract. Because I've been in relationships where she won't appreciate the little things. And it actually makes you feel like, I feel like my value actually gets chipped at. You know, when I do something, and like you said, I think it's beautiful. Like, I don't mind my chick being, you know, the star, and having all the light on her, and me elevating her, you know, and adding value where it's appropriate, where it's necessary. I love uplifting women. But you're so right, the appreciation needs to come back, because after a while, like, if the appreciation is not there, you know, as a man, you're like, you lose it. You're just like, you know, what's even the point? Appreciation is a big thing. And I think that it comes, like, I think that's inherent though. Like, if you think about back in the day where men used to go fight wars, like, what were they? I mean, they're not just doing that for appreciation, but they're doing that because of this unconditional love. Like, there were 16-year-olds who were willing to die. Like, they some of them knew they weren't going to come back, and they were willing to do that because of the love that they had for their wives, their kids, their mums, you know. And I think a part of them who went to do that, it's unconditional love, but a big part of it is they knew they were going to be appreciated. Yeah. They knew that they were going to be recognized as a protector. You know what I mean? I genuinely believe that. Yeah. You know, and I think that that's, key. But yeah, sorry, what were you going to say?
Oh, no. I see a need to get vulnerable here with this and admit the fact that as a woman, I have struggled at times to show men appreciation, because there's such a deep sense of fear that showing a man that you value him and you appreciate him in this society can cause men to devalue you and discard you. And that's one of the hardest things I've had to face as a woman, is not hating myself for being kind and compassionate to the wrong man. Because oftentimes as women, it blows up in our face to be seen as too keen. And oftentimes men will misinterpret that nice nature, that value that we're expressing as being something that is clingy or easy or whatever. And women, like, we're quite deep emotionally a lot of the time. So it's really, really hard navigating this sort of stuff. It really is, because you can show appreciation to the wrong man and then you feel weak and stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. That's I get where you're coming from, because I've been in situations where and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but it's true, like, where I've been hunting, hunt. She's playing hard to get. I get her. And by the way, I'm the same. I don't become intimate with them so I don't hurt them. Yeah. Because if I'd become intimate with her in the duration of my hunt to try and get her, and then I decide that I didn't want her anymore, that would have really hurt her. So, you hunt, get her. She becomes vulnerable, and then I don't want her anymore. She wants me now. There's something about me. There's something about it that I'm just like, I don't know if I want that anymore, which is weird. I don't know what. It is pretty toxic, but I have pulled boundaries. Like I said, I won't get intimate with her. It's more, I'm just kind of like testing to see, do I actually want a life with this person, or do I not want a life with this person? And so I don't actually do anything, believe it or not, don't do anything that makes her feel some way. Like, we just had a friendship, but I get the mindset behind that and how it could go really bad.
I guess for me personally, I'm chasing, in a way, a union that's going to require constant development. Yeah. I don't think I've really dated anybody that I don't have a sense of purpose with, or I can't see a sense of purpose with. I think men are chasing something, and they're not chasing purpose through a union, you know? And I think when you're chasing purpose through your unions with other people, you will constantly have that chase instinct activated, because how can we level up What can
yeah,
we
yeah,
do
yeah.
next?
Yeah.
And it becomes an integration that is healthy.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We devalue things that are too easily accessible, that we don't have the ability to grow with, or things that, and oftentimes you may place limitations on another human being that aren't necessarily there. There's a lot of traumas that come up where people will shut things down ahead of time and not explore connection correctly, and then just on to the next one to repeat the pattern as well. But, you know, chasing purpose together, I think, is a really healthy way to navigate that, and it keeps things alive.
Yeah. I think that's really important, actually. That's so true. And for some reason, I've never thought of it like that, because you're right. I think for men, majority of men, their purpose is everything. And that's why you have a lot of losers out here these days, because they don't have purpose. There's no goal that they're striving for. There's no vision. But they've never thought about how the female can also then contribute, and you can be on that journey together. Like, I've always thought of it in isolation, where it's like, I've got purpose, I've got a vision, I'm trying to build this for her. Never thought about it like building it together for us. Never really thought about it in that perspective. So no, that's interesting. Another thing you mentioned about positive masculinity is being attentive. And I completely agree with you. I think that, you know, being able to read the room, you know, being able to not just communicate, but to comprehend and understand, you know, what your significant other's trying to communicate to you. Because they always say, you know, communication is key in relationships. And, you know, I read somewhere that it's not communication. Everyone can communicate. It's comprehension. Do you actually understand what your significant other's trying to tell you when she's struggling with something? You know, do you understand, can you read a room? Do you understand what's going to embarrass her in public? What's going to make her feel uncomfortable in public? So do you want to touch a little bit more on attentiveness? Because I actually think that is positive masculinity.
Yeah. So a man who is mindful of the way he represents me, like you just touched on, is incredibly important to me in terms of the circles that I'm in and the things that I do. I can't be with a man who comes across sloppy, that comes across promiscuous, all that sort of low value hoe shit, pardon my French, but that's the sort of thing that I would eliminate from my list of desirables in terms of a man. I think that, you know, even a man that will, like, I had a guy walk through a door and, you know, those plastic, what are they called? So the plastic shades on a door. He walked through the door, like, ahead of me and let the plastic fly back in my face.
Right, yeah.
I'm like, this is not the one.
Yeah. No, well, it's funny. It's funny, but that is so true, because that sort of sloppiness, if we're talking about survival of the fittest, you'd be gone, buddy.
Yeah.
You would be gone. You cannot protect the family. If we're going back to our roots, you cannot protect the family if you are not freaking aware and laser focused and socially intelligent. And do you know your surroundings? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's a big thing for sure.
And I was like 5 months deep into getting to know this person, and I'm like,
you're like, no way. So it's that serious for some of you guys.
It seems so little, but something as simple as having plastic from a door fly back in my face, it shows me there's no mindfulness over me as a woman. So that mate guarding factor is not there, but that he does not have that instinct. And men that do not have that instinct, I do not perceive as valuable to me in terms of a relationship, because again, it comes down to that consideration. His objective is him and what he's seeking, and that translates through the behavior. So what seems like maybe not a big deal is actually a huge deal, because in his unconscious, subconscious, autopilot state, he is not trained and able to consider others.
That's so. I genuinely think that's super powerful. That's something that a lot of males lack. But yeah, it's so important. But I'll be honest with you. It's a value for you. Is it a value for a lot of other women? And honestly, I don't think it is for girls. Maybe for women. For girls, as in, you know, girls who have not fully matured, or they don't, you know, they're kind of just dating around. That, you know, haven't picked the guy they want to settle with, or they think that they've picked the right guy, but he doesn't have those traits and characteristics. Like, is that something that for women is actually encouraged for them to look out for.
No, I think there's very limited awareness. I mean, it's improved over the last few years. I think being locked down, a lot of women sort of went and leveled up their awareness on a lot of different things, having extra time to really examine themselves and their own emotions.
Yeah.
But no, I wouldn't say that this is readily available in terms of what we're taught to assess in a man and the value of which we place on it. And I think a lot of women, they do get that attentiveness from men, but they're not aware of it. So how can they appreciate it fully, like for what it is as a green flag? I know it took me a very long time, at least, to become aware of men's movements and how their behaviour really tells you all you need to know about them. I think that you can really say anything, but consistency in that respect is really, really important when you're evaluating a man. It's like I said, a man that doesn't naturally feel a protective instinct to look out for me and my path, that's not my man.
Yeah, that's fair. I want to touch on the man whore stuff that you touched on briefly, because I think this is important. And keep in mind, I actually, when I say I enjoy listening to Andrew Tate, there's a lot that I agree with that he says. In saying that, I don't, like, I'm a very intelligent person. Like, I can decipher what he says that's valuable and that I can actually apply to my life to become better. And then I can be like, yeah, that's a bit ridiculous. So a lot of the stuff that he talks about in terms of, you know, men just can have sex with multiple women, and that actually, you know, creates, that's their value is not directly linked to that, but the more they sleep with, the more experience they have, the more that women are going to be attracted to that, you know?
Disagree.
Now, absolutely. No, I disagree as well. And I disagree from more from a religious perspective. It's very clear what the Bible states.
Yeah.
Right? So even just from that premise, I completely reject that. But it's interesting because you have a lot of young guys who listen to Andrew Tate, and because they don't have the intelligence to, you know, take it apart and take the good things and ignore the bad things, we're finding that a lot of men that I speak with these days, they actually do think it's a good thing to go sleep around with multiple women, and they think that that's what makes them attractive, right? They think that that's actually a quality that women are seeking, a man with experience, a man who slept with 50 girls. Do you want to touch on that?
Scarcity creates value. A man who is not selective is inherently garbage to me. If I think a man is accessible by lower value females, me classing myself as higher value based on my behaviour, my ability to deny, you know, like celibate, you know what I mean? So I think when you have an ability to deny yourself sexual experience and you then come across somebody who has demonstrated no ability or discernment in regards to their sexual experience, it's extremely unattractive as a trait. It's like, oh, it doesn't take much to get you into bed, does it? You know, you don't value your sexual essence all too much. Yeah. I mean, I've encountered a lot of promiscuous men, and honestly, it's been a deal breaker for me. And again, every time I've gone against that and thought maybe I'm being a little bit judgmental, should have stuck to it from the beginning, because I think it desensitizes men to connection. And even worse, promiscuous men are not usually emotionally intimate men. So they become then conditioned to these sexual encounters that have really no emotional substance or meaning. And again, like I was saying earlier, sex for a lot of modern day men is just glorified masturbation. They're emulating porn. It's just a release to them. It's got nothing to do with actual union.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because I have heard this on, I don't really like the podcast. What's that guy? The guy is kind of like light-skinned, Fresh and Fit podcast. Fresh and Fit. He's really, he says a lot of stupid things, I'm not going to lie. A lot of stupid things. And one of the things that he says, and you know, I'm sure it's been reflected in maybe some of the stuff that the Tates have said, is it's not cheating for a man. If you're in a relationship, if I'm in a relationship, it's not cheating for me to go have sex with women, with another lady, because we don't have that emotional, we're talking about think about it, you just touched on this, the emotional union, because there's no emotion to it. like you said, it's just masturbation. So they've classified that as well. It's not cheating. I can be dating a girl and go have sex with another girl, and that's not cheating because there's no emotion to that. I'm just, now I definitely don't agree with that, but it's just interesting how that's being promoted among men, and no wonder there's no emotional unity anymore. No wonder emotions aren't a big part of relationships.
As a low-value man, I can see how you would gaslight yourself into believing that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No, I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%.
Men are not the prize. I think men can be of very high quality and value, but women ultimately are the prize.
Why do you think women are the prize?
Men need women in such a way, I think, like they need our presence and our energy. Like the most successful, balanced men will have that female to fall back on. The most fulfilled men have a female in their corner, We need each other, don't get me wrong. But just these low-value men with these impulse control problems that view themselves as the be-all, end-all in any relationship and go and have as many sexual experiences as possible are just trying to validate themselves in being the prize because they aren't.
Yeah.
Like security is very silent. It's a presence about it. Insecurity is very loud. The Fresh and Fit podcast, I mean, the lead host is very cluster B, narcissistic personality to me in the way that I've perceived him and his thinking. The co-host, a very passive male that seems to just go along with what the lead guy says. And I watched recently Ethan Klein absolutely destroyed the Fresh and Fit podcast because he got them out of their native environment onto his podcast because he has a lot more clout, obviously, and just destroyed them.
I haven't seen it. I want to watch it.
Oh, it's so fantastic.
Yeah.
He asked them, if you're so set on men's ability to find a quality woman, why aren't you married? And then, you're not married? So you don't have the ability to find a high quality woman. You know what I mean? Because they always talk about the gold diggers and the whatever, and I don't know, he just eviscerated them, but it was beautiful. Mwah.
Yeah, look, I'm definitely not a fan of theirs. I think they just, there's no substance to them. They're pretty stupid at how they speak. And they think that they can say one thing, put into a clip, and they think it's a gotcha moment. Like a gotcha. It's like, no, I don't think so at all. I don't think anything you're saying is like, wow, but, in saying that, women, you believe women are the prize. I think that when we play this game, like women are the prize versus men are the prize, I think that's where it can kind of, go a bit south. I mean, personally, do I think I'm the prize? I do. I'm not going to lie. But I think why that's maybe valid is because I do have boundaries, though. And so it's like, I like everything that you said where it's, they think they're the prize, but then they'll go sleep with 50 women. It's like to make them feel like they're the prize. Well, no, I actually have boundaries. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of high value men do have boundaries, and they have delayed gratification. They have those characteristics. They can be patient. They're not just trying to, get a woman in bed.
I think when we look at the prize terminology, I think it's important to say at least what I mean by that.
Yep.
I think that women are not supposed to be in a position of chasing a man. I don't personally subscribe to that. Like, we are receivers in our very essence. It's our job to be as high value and quality as possible.
Yeah.
And then basically conduct a process of elimination with men that flow in our direction. With men, I do not believe that men should be chased, and it's the lower value women that are constantly chasing for validation and affirmation from men, which leads them to believe in some way they're the prize. Those men are in their feminine energy. No,
I agree with that definition for sure.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I mean, men are inherently the hunters. They chase. And everything that we've done historically as well has been for men don't do things for themselves. And let's actually touch on this because this is really important, and then we'll move on to some of these questions. But when you're out there doing whatever you're doing, working, going to war, you're doing it for someone that you care about, someone that you love. And I think that's positive masculinity. Whereas men who are out there doing it for themselves, like trying to get rich for themselves, you know, maybe that's where the narcissism comes in. Whereas I'm trying to get rich for my future family. You know, I'm trying to do it for my current family, my parents.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's actually really positive that you're striving for something. And yeah, you can be so laser focused, but ultimately I'm doing it for someone else. I'm doing it for love. I'm doing it for, you know, future kids.
Yeah.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, and it all stems down to the strength of your code of conduct.
Yeah.
So for a man to be dutiful, he has to have a picture that's bigger than himself. And so what does that picture entail? So you're absolutely right, and that's like a premium quality and a necessary one in a man.
Yeah. I want to touch on gender roles, and we'll probably end with this. Gender roles. Do you think they're important? As in, I'm not saying they can't overlap, because they obviously, I mean, women work. Not all women stay at home and raise their kids. But do you think it's important to at least have some standard of gender roles in society?
Everything is so broken. So I think we're at a point now where the stress placed on each gender to survive is so extravagant that, like I said, women have to earn as well as men. And so there's no real room for gender roles within that dynamic, because you're entering a partnership where you both have to compensate for each other at varying times, which I think kind of confuses us in terms of our personal feminine or personal masculine energy, you know? And so it's hard to maintain that. And I suppose the only solution in this day and age is balance, because we'll never have it back to the traditional way of being. And so is your partner balanced? Are they able to fulfill these duties if you're not able to, and vice versa?
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Do you think so? We're not able to go back to those, the really traditional days. I mean, I know I'm always going through reels and I see, you know, a really traditional dynamic in like Texas or whatever, where the wife is literally a housewife, you know, and you know, all these comments like, that's ridiculous, that's stupid, blah, blah. So look, I agree. I think as a society, I mean, I'm just talking about the West though. I mean, in a lot of like Middle Eastern countries, the traditional norms are still there.
Oh yeah, like still on and popping.
Yeah. But in the West, I think you're right. I don't think we're ever going to get back to what it used to be. Would you want it to go back to what it used to be?
Not entirely.
Yep. So what parts would you want, and what parts wouldn't you want?
I think, you know, there is validity to the concept of the patriarchy and how it has been toxic and limiting women and their expression and their individuality and the value that we hold. I think a lot of the traditional values are based on service that we can provide as women, not necessarily the ways in which we're valued and revered in return. That's been problematic. I don't think that in any scenario you can have your cake and eat it too without compromise. And I think that's important for people to remember, you know. If you're going to be a traditional housewife, you will need to compromise certain things to be able to do that. Same as if you want to be a working woman, you make sacrifices to have that happen. Like, you can't be a mother to the full extent of which you'd love to be if you balance work as well. It's difficult and it's going to be an imperfect system, and you've got to be okay with that, like within yourself, if you're going to go down that route. So I guess removing a lot of the judgments on these situations is a good thing, but then there needs to be some room for the truth as well, which is that we could really be doing a lot more to enhance our mutual happiness in terms of our relationships and our families, and having healthier quality connections.
Yeah, cool. I actually do want to touch on the LGBT as well. Now, you obviously said that you have a bit of history with that. Do you want to touch on that in a bit more detail? Or not really?
Not really, other than being the daughter of lesbians. But I think, you know, the LGBT community actually gives us a really good insight into the necessary polarity, like the opposites coexisting in unison, because oftentimes in a same-sex relationship, you will have one person who is really emphasizing feminine traits and one who's really compensating for masculine.
Yeah.
Like in the lesbian relationships, we see that all the time. You know, there's usually one that is more masculine than the other, or they'll swap between the two. In gay relationships, it's a thing as well. If it's not so much of a casual, transient sexual relationship, if they're in a partnership, oftentimes somebody has more of a caretaker role and the other a more provider mentality. And so I think what it really indicates is that there is a push towards balance that's constantly trying to work itself out quite naturally in order to maintain attraction and quality of life within relationships.
Yeah.
Two things entirely of the same, it's going to kill attraction. There's got to be a push and pull in every connection. And so I don't really have anything negative to say in regards to the LGBT relationships, other than it actually provides evidence for the need for balance in heterosexual relationships. Because you're looking at two things of the same that are not actually existing in the same way. They're not showing up the same in the relationship.
There's actually, I've touched on this book a few times. It's a great book, The Way of the Superior Man. And he actually, at the beginning of the book, touches on the polar opposites. Like, there has to be a masculine and there has to be a feminine energy. There has to be. And he does talk about, even in lesbian relationships or gay relationships, there will be, for the relationship to be functioning, there will be polar opposites. And I think I agree. And, you know, I mentioned in the last podcast as well, you know, a reason why men, you know, or women feel the need to play that role is because men are not providing their side of the bargain. That masculine energy, it's all, like you mentioned, it's all kind of like fake. Just put on a show, like, yeah, be masculine, go to the gym, hit a boxing bag. And they think that's what masculine energy is, but it's not helping females. And so a lot of females feel the need to actually compensate for that and play into that role, you know.
Yeah. One might even say that men being in their toxic masculinity is a form of being in their feminine energy.
I agree.
You know, it's focusing on what they can take.
Yeah.
Rather what they can receive is what they're focusing on, rather than what they can add to any given equation. So if a man is coming from life with the lens of what is in it for him, it's always going to be toxic. Yeah. You know, as human beings, we need to see how we can add value to our situations. And
you're kind of right. I mean, I don't mean this in a sexist way, but maybe I shouldn't say it, but I'm saying it.
No, say it.
So, yeah, like if a man is going into any scenario and he's thinking, what's in it for me first, you're right. I think that's a very feminine trait. I don't think that's masculine at all. Like, at all. So I think, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. Like, when I say it's a feminine trait, I'm not saying that's a bad thing and that all women just think about themselves. You know, I'm not saying it like that, but I do believe that, you know, you're not a masculine man if you can't put others above yourself, you know. But yeah, I guess we can kind of wrap it up, is there something else that you want to touch on or add to?
I'm just thinking if we've left anything out here.
It's such a big topic that probably haven't. I mean, we haven't talked about even raising sons.
And you know what? It's so hard not to speak generally on a lot of these things. I think my concern with a podcast like this is being misunderstood in terms of generalizations and how there's exceptions to rules.
Yeah.
Of course, there are exceptions to rules, but if we're looking at the general collective and basic principles, I think it's fair to say that a lot of these are true and accurate. And so my intention, I suppose, is not to exclude anyone or not acknowledge people that do a better job than certain others. It's just that we cannot simply allocate the time to cover all of these variables.
Yeah, no, 100%. You're right. It would take, I mean, this is the second episode we've done, and everything that we discussed today is actually very different to the first one we did. You know, so this topic, it's a big one, and you're absolutely right. Like, there's always going to be outlier. Like there's always going to be an exception to the rule. Always. And so when we have these conversations, it's not just with this topic, but a lot of topics. It's important to note that, we're giving, number one, our perspective, our opinion. But even if it's backed by fact and statistics, like there's always going to be an exception to that.
Yeah.
But the majority of the time, 89% of the time, it is accurate. And it is reflective. It's a true reflection of what's actually going on in society, what's happening, what majority of men deal with, what a majority of women deal with, etc. So
I think, to round it off, what I would say to men of this day and age would be, do you have a refined code of conduct? If you don't, it's time to sit down with yourself and understand what your code of conduct is. What are your values? What are your non-negotiables? And what value do you have existing already that you can offer a partnership? The same with women. Do you have any undeclared wounds? Are there things that you maybe need to work on? How are you showing up in your relationships? Are you appreciative? Are you graceful? Or are you unintentionally emasculating men that come into contact with you? With men, I think it's very important to change your mentality to how can I add value to any given situation, whether it be work or relationships, because it's finding where you add value that's going to validate your place. It's more of an exercise in fulfilling you and having you experience stability as a man, what you can identify as being your qualities. So these are things I think would be a very good start to repairing the relationship between women and men.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a good way to wrap it up as well.
Yeah.
So thanks so much for obviously doing this podcast. We'll definitely have to do it again. Next time you're in Melbourne, we'll have to do it again. Maybe not on the same topic. Maybe we'll do one of yours, like a political...
Yeah.
Can you imagine a political type of podcast?
Yeah,
That'd go
fun.
Crazy. Yeah, it'd be fun. Yeah. But thanks so much.
Off, yeah.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.